Sure. All right. So, hello, my name is Adrian Alvarez, one of your summer art camp counselors, and I'm here to present Jessi Eoin's Alt Text for Comics, or present Jessi to present Text for Comics. Uh, and so, Jessi Eoin is a disabled illustrator who loves making, talking, and reading comics, and is passionate about accessibility in art. Their work focuses on uplifting fat, disabled, queer, and trans people and has been featured in Just Femme and Dandy, Wizards in Space, Literary Magazine, Carte Blanche, Rebel Mountain Press's Disabled Voices Anthology, and elsewhere. They have also exhibited in the Feminist Art Collective's Feminist Art Fest on Disability in Art. They are the chair, sorry, of the events committee here in the Cartoonist Cooperative, while also being a member of the Nib and Ink Fest 2026 committee. And when, yes, and when they are not working or volunteering, Jessi can be found in their naturally semi-feral state, reading comics, trying to do 1,000 hobbies, or spontaneously designing colorful spreadsheets. And with that, I hand it over to Jessi.
Thank you, Adrian. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. I'm very excited to talk to you about alt text for comics today. Let's get started. You should have a link to the slides in the presentation. And for everybody watching this recording who is a member of the co-op, you should have access to the slides in the co-op library as well. So let's go ahead and start. A little bit about me. My name is Jessi, as Adrian very kindly introduced me. I am disabled. I am an accessibility enthusiast. I make art of fat and particularly disabled people, and I offer editorial services like transcripts and alt text as well. Fun fact, that did not come up until after I made this because I was looking for people who offered these services to recommend to you, and I couldn't find many. So now I do that. Just a quick note about the art in the slides. They are considered not safe for work, I believe. There's like artistic nudity in here, but I wanted to highlight some of my art that features disabled characters because I don't get to see that as often as I would like. So you will see naked people in here, but they are all drawn. um, so just a little overview of what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about what alt text is, how it differs and is similar to things like image descriptions and transcripts, why you should include alt text and how you can write alt text. And we'll do a few exercises and some practices and take a look at some examples. And we will also do the same for comics, and we'll talk about a few resources, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Big disclaimer, I know that a lot of people can get a little sensitive about alt text. I feel like some people kind of view it as a judgment if you are or are not doing them, if you're not including it in your work. And the point of today's workshop is to make sure that you just have access to the tools that will help you to do alt text more and to help you incorporate accessibility into your own work. It's not a moral judgment on you whether you have never done it before or you've done it a different way than the way I'm suggesting here today. So don't feel bad if what you do yourself is different from what we're talking about. This is just to give you some tools to figure out how to do it more. So let's talk about alt text image descriptions and transcripts and how to understand how they're similar and different. So there are a lot of options for making your comic more accessible to disabled users. And today we're going to focus on three main ones, which are alt text, image descriptions, and transcripts. And alt text is typically a briefer, shorter description about what an image is and its function, whereas an image description is typically a longer description with more details about the image and its contents. A transcript is more like if you have a whole comic, then you have a whole bunch of pages to go with that describes each page in that comic. This is also found for things like videos as well. Additionally, alt text is often used interchangeably with the term image description, and this is because writing it can be more of an art than a science, and it depends on who you talk to as to who will feel different ways about how to describe it. So don't stress yourself out trying to figure out what the perfect way is to write alt text because there is no real perfect way to do it. It's just about what the image is and what you're trying to convey to your audience and what you think will be helpful for them. And just remember throughout this whole thing that providing anything is almost always better than providing nothing at all. So doing your best and asking for help are really great strategies here. So why should you include alt text? There are a lot of really good reasons to add alt text to your comics making routine, and most of them are very helpful, but the primary reason is accessibility. But we also have an SEO boost, which is a search engine optimization boost. We have compliance reasons, and we have requirements. Accessibility, as I mentioned, is the first and foremost one. This is used by people who use screen readers and for people with cognitive disabilities, as well as people with poor or limited internet access where images are not always downloaded. An SEO boost can also be helpful. While it's not as important as accessibility, adding alt text to your images and comics can boost your SEO. This will help to bring in more traffic to your website, and it provides search engines with an actionable result that they can then share with the person searching for work that is like yours. And a note about my own experience with this, I was recently approached by a publisher to create a comic about disabled characters. And I strongly believe that it is likely because I include so much alt text in my work and I describe a lot of my characters in the alt text as disabled. And I don't really describe it very much else on my website and other places. So I do believe that this has helped me to find work. Another reason is compliance. In many cases, providing accessibility to your work is required by law, especially if you're in the United States. That's because the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA, requires that things that are made available to the public are also need to be available to people who are disabled. There are exceptions to ADA requirements, and you're unlikely to get sued, but honestly, it is still the ethical thing to do. And finally, another reason that you might need to use alt text is for requirements. So for something like the Nib and Ink Fest, which will be coming up again in May 2026, we do require that all of our comics and images provided have alt text so that when we put it up on the website, we are compliant as a cooperative with the law here in the States. This is required for everything from your marketplace submissions, your sampler submissions, and your Oops All Comics zine as well. So how do you write alt text? I think this is something that trips people up a lot. Um, One thing that you should know is that we're creating comics and art is a very creative venture. Alt text is meant to serve a very specific purpose. So it's important that you are careful about how you're conveying that information to make sure it's actually telling your audience what they need to know. So punctuation is key. If you had a word that is smushed together, kind of like blue sky, the app, then the screen readers are not always able to recognize it as a word, especially if it's a new thing like Blue Sky app. Like it may eventually get added so that the screen reader understands that this is a different word, but typically Blue Sky is separated. So in order to get around that, the way that you can help screen readers to recognize this as a word is to capitalize the B and the S in this example of Blue Sky so that it will read blue sky out loud. And then another example here is start here as a play on art here. So you would want to put that in the actual proper uppercase and lowercase traditionally so that it is clear to the screen reader what they need to say. Another thing that screen readers can't really understand is abbreviations. So something like BC for because or NVM for never mind. You'll need to spell those things out so that folks understand what they're hearing, because otherwise it'll spell out NVM or BC, and somebody may not have the context to understand that that's what that means. This is also helpful for people who just don't know what an acronym is. So people who, if you are writing it in your native language and somebody isn't a native speaker to that language, it would help them to know things that are spelled out, as well as neurodivergent people who aren't not always clued in on the latest things too. Like I just learned what oomph means. The what was it, mutual friend or something like that. Another thing is to use letters, not symbols or numbers. So we have a great example here for the World Tree comic. They use the computer language. I don't really know what it's called, but like substituting letters and numbers, which is very fun. But for accessibility purposes, somebody says "leet speak." Thank you, I appreciate it. Using that makes no sense to a screen reader, so spelling out what the intention is very helpful. So you can notice here, I capitalized the W, I capitalized the T in tree, and they're still together, and the screen reader is going to be able to read that out loud compared to the one with the threes and the zero. And things that you can ask yourself when you're thinking about how to provide a description are, how do you intend to this image to be read? What purpose does this image serve? What feelings are you trying to evoke with this image? What and how much information is needed to be able to understand the image without looking at it? And could you understand what the image is by reading the alt text alone? So if an image is used purely for illustrating a quick point, such as showing an image of a chrysanthemum in an article describing types of flowers, then simply adding something like purple chrysanthemums with a dark green leaves lined up in rows should be sufficient. If an image is being used as a means of telling a story, such as with a comic or an illustration, then or conveying information about its contents, such as for an infographic, you'll likely want to be a little more descriptive. So let's do an exercise. So let's pretend that you're reading an article and you're interested in adopting a pet ferret, and you've never even seen a ferret in person before. If you're looking for information about the pros and cons of adopting a ferret because you want to be educated as a pet owner, and you're reading a helpful website, then your internet suddenly slows all the way down and you have like no connection. You can still see the text of the article, but the bulk of the information is on this table, and that's not showing up because it's an image. So suddenly you can't see the image, but you see this description of that table. So the alt text says, a table illustrating the pros and cons of having a ferret. How helpful is this description to you? What information does this give you to help you learn about the pros and cons of adopting a ferret? Probably not much. um, So this is what the actual table itself looks like, and this is a real example from a real website. This is unfortunately pretty common, and it can be frustrating for people. Yeah, someone says low-key insulting, and I agree. Like it doesn't actually convey the depth of information in the table. It just kind of brushes over it. It doesn't really help anybody who needs this information to understand that information. So as you can see, this table goes into depth. It shows aspects, companionship, maintenance and care, lifespan and health, housing and security, and it talks about the pros and cons for each of those aspects, and it has sometimes multiple bullet points per aspect. So when we design alt text or an image description for a table like this, we need to be sure that we're providing the information that is actually being conveyed in the table to somebody who might use a screen reader or loses their internet. So now let's try a little bit of a different approach. Let's pretend you're now doing some research about flower symbolism for your latest script. Now you're looking at an article that shows a picture of a flower, and then it gives you a few paragraphs of text about the history of symbolism around that flower. But your internet slows down again and you can't see the images anymore. So how useful would you find this alt text for research on flower symbolism? Does it help you? Does it confuse you? And the alt text is, a white person stands outdoors in what looks like midday. They appear to be female, wearing a white t-shirt under a beige apron that loops around their neck. The apron has grass stains on it. The person is standing in front of a field of flowers, presumably the same as the ones they're holding. The background is blurred to give it a dreamy effect and to focus on the flowers. The person is holding a huge bunch of anemone flowers with white petals and dark blue or black centers with yellow-green leaves all around the bases of each flower. Some of the flowers droop down while others look perky. Now, this is the image that I made that alt text for. You probably don't need this. Yeah, somebody says, I was lost by the end of the first sentence. Agreed. Like, you don't really need all of that information to convey for this type of article that this is a photo of anemone flowers. So you might say something like, a photo of anemone flowers, or a person stands in a field with an armful of white anemone flowers, or you might perhaps describe the flowers are white with dark centers. But you really don't need the level of detail that was in the previous slide to convey that point for this article. So you've got this. A lot of people do get nervous when writing alt text, especially for the first time, worrying that they're going to get it wrong. And it can be helpful, instead of thinking of it as wrong or right, to think of it as what's helpful or what's not necessarily helpful, or maybe something that's sufficiently described versus maybe not sufficiently described. In many cases, providing even a little bit of alt text, though, is still preferable to providing none at all. And if you're doing your best as you understand how to do it, then that's great. And if you've ever written a script for your comic or even just an outline, you're honestly halfway there already, because you already know how to describe your comic and to tell people what's happening in the panels. And if you've ever told somebody about what your comic is about, you've also got a good hand on how to do this too. It's a matter of just kind of writing that down versus saying it out loud. And this is also a skill that gets easier with practice. It's just like any other comic making skill. You may not be the most amazing alt text writer at the beginning, but it is something that you get better with at over time. I used to be way too lengthy. It's a little embarrassing how long I used to make mine. But now I've gotten a lot better because I understand, oh, this is just about conveying the minimal amount of information to understand what's happening. I don't need to write an entire novel every time I'm writing a description for something. Oh, I also forgot. This is a really great way to help develop your editor's eye too for your comic. And also, there's really no shame in asking others for help with writing your alt text. Plenty of people, including me, and I cannot stress this enough, I also struggle with writing alt text because of their own disabilities, or because they're short on time, or they're a single parent and they've got 1,000 things to do with their kid. Like, it's very understandable that it can be difficult for people to approach it. But that doesn't mean you can't ask for help and try to make the work a little easier on yourself. So you can do this by asking a friend to help you out with that. You might have a friend whose accessibility is their special interest, or you might have a friend who is looking to do some work, and you might want to do a work exchange with them, or like in the co-op where we have a dedicated work exchange channel, or even through paid services is fantastic as well. So let's take a moment to practice together. I would like for you to take the next 2 minutes to type up some alt text for this illustration that you see here. And I would like for you to think about, how would you describe what you see? So keep these questions in mind. What's happening in this image? Is there a narrative to this piece? What details feel important to share? How would you convey the overall tone of the image? And what and how much information is needed to be able to understand the image without looking at it, while not also overwhelming the reader? So I'd love for you to go ahead and type that up if you get a minute, and share yours in the chat when you finish. And I'm going to go ahead and set my timer for 2 minutes. I forgot to set this up before, so you get a few extra seconds. Okay, we're going to start right now. I'm going to mute myself too. Hey, so it's been 2 minutes. If you're up for it, I'd love to see what you've written in the chat. Um, I'm going to read a couple out loud as well. We have somebody who wrote, "A woman sits in the middle of a bright clearing in the forest with a small camp and a cup of tea. She's sitting in a cozy position with a gold-winged fantasy animal and a big worm." I like that. That was fantastic. We have another one that says, "A bright and cheery illustration in pink and purple and turquoise tones and a hand-drawn style. A person rests leaning on back on a gold mythical winged bear creature, holding tea and resting. Her right lower leg is missing, and she has a cane nearby. Cheerful bugs buzz around the forest clearing." Wonderful. And I know that 2 minutes may have felt pretty short and maybe not like enough time to adequately do this, but I chose the 2 minute restriction because I wanted to show just how much you can do quickly, and how it doesn't need to be a big thing in order to get it done. We have another one that says, "A green haired figure sits in the middle of a forest drinking tea. They sit against a giant winged bear and pet a worm. Rain is falling and bees buzz around them." That's also wonderful. We have another one that says, "Pastel illustration. A person takes a moment, eyes closed. They're holding tea, petting an isopod, and sharing a quilted blanket with a golden, large, cat-like creature. The creature rests near them. One wing is sheltering the person from the rain. Bees and bugs buzz cozily in the foreground." Wonderful. A big gold winged cat is a pillow for a cozy large protagonist. She's relaxing with a warm beverage while her amputated leg is up on the log she's on. Her cane is resting on her bag, and we're looking in on her along with the insects. It's raining. Fantastic. Y'all are wonderful at this. I feel like y'all really did a great job of capturing the essence of the scene, and you did a really good job of capturing like the coziness of it and how it feels restful. And that's pretty much exactly how I tried to approach it with mine as well. Um, yeah, and somebody says you managed to get a lot of details in that I struggled with, and that's totally fair. Like I mentioned, this is something that you get a little bit easier with time. It just becomes a little more natural for you. So here's the alt text that I created. I wrote a colorful illustration of a person resting in a clearing of a forest on a rainy day, enjoying a cup of tea under the outstretched wing of a golden griffin, taking a nap behind the person. A starry quilt covers its paws ever so slightly. The person pats a cat-sized roly-poly bug sitting next to them on the log, which is why I was grinning when y'all wrote worm. That really cracked me up. I love that. But I feel like that's also a great way of seeing how many similarities we also captured as well. Everybody pretty much mentioned the tea, and now I'm learning also what needs clarity in my work too. This is hilarious. But everybody was able to kind of capture the essence of the scene, and I think that's fantastic. Y'all are really good at this. So I was actually struggling with brain fog that day, so it's not as descriptive as I usually try to make mine, but I did it in the way that y'all did. I took a couple of minutes and just did it as quickly as I could, and I still managed to capture the essence of it, just like y'all captured the essence of the illustration too. One thing I forgot to mention in my work was that I forgot to mention that this is a disabled person, and that's actually a key feature of it. So next time I would personally change this to write of a disabled person resting, and I would include that their cane is nearby and that there's a beetle in the foreground, just because I particularly liked that detail when I drew it. But other than that, it's pretty much the same as y'all. You did too. I'm glad, thanks. But yeah, so as you can see, it doesn't need to be super in depth to capture what the essence of an illustration is, what the heart of it is. And I think y'all really nailed it. So, how do we apply this to comics? When you first begin writing alt text for your own work, it might be tempting to include as much detail as you can get in there, especially for comics, because of how much effort you put into everything. You're thinking about the world building, the character designs, the character personality and traits, the plot arc. There's so much happening. So, how do you figure out how to kind of keep it pared down so that the heart of your story is there while also not overwhelming whoever is reading your alt text? Or perhaps you might fall on the other end of the spectrum where everything feels important, so it ends up feeling like nothing is important enough to describe. Or maybe you just feel lost about what to do because you're not really sure what to do when you write alt text. So it helps to give yourself a break from your work before you start doing the alt text if you're not quite sure about what elements are important enough to describe. And that can help you to come back with fresh eyes later and read it as if you were reading someone else's work. One way that you could try doing this is to read your comic out loud. Pretend you have a group of kids nearby who are like, wow, please tell me about that amazing comic. Or maybe you're doing story time for adults, like at a drag show in the library, something like that. So think about what you need to know to understand the comic and what's happening on the page in order to describe your comic. So, one thing that you should do is try to describe the setting at least once per page, even if it's just briefly or once per environment change. So, for example, you could say page 2 in the same room. And that way, when they're on the second page, they know nothing has really changed, but you didn't have to go into detail and describe the whole room over and over again. Or for another example, you could say panel 1, Katie gets ready in her room for the party. Panel 2, she puts on her coat and reaches for the door. Panel 3, outside now, Katie looks up at the stars. So when you hear that, you kind of get a pretty clear description. You may not know exactly the color of the coat or the way that the door moves or the way her room looks while she's changing, but you understand the essence of the story here. So another thing to do is make sure that you also describe the characters. Sometimes we get so familiar with our characters that we just know them inside and out. So we kind of forget to take the time to explain it in our alt text and describe this is what the character looks like. So doing that, like when they're first introduced, is helpful, but you don't need to do it every single time. Describing the characters without going into more detail than is needed to understand can be helpful. And you can also use this as a chance to describe the mood. So we have an example here. Rodrigo and Antoinette's eyes meet from across the room. Everyone else seems to fade away into the background. So sit with that for a second. What mood does that give you, that description? What does that tell you about these two characters and how they feel about each other? And now let's compare that to Rodrigo and Antoinette look at each other across the room. Jenny and Katie look at their phones while standing nearby. Bill gets a drink in the corner. What mood does this convey? Does it feel different? What relationships do you feel are important in this panel? Both are acceptable descriptions, but the first one is going to be clear that maybe there's a romantic moment between these two characters, whereas the second one, maybe they're office mates and they're just like giving each other a look like, can you believe this? And we're seeing the other characters mill around. So it really depends on what the tone is that you're going for with your description here. Another thing to keep in mind is describing your color palette, especially if it informs your story in some way. If your comic is in black and white, then the appearance of color suddenly is going to pretty much indicate some big things are happening. So, as an example, here we have Derek looks up from the ground. A bright blue circle appears on his forehead where the crow's beak tapped him. That's going to indicate something to your reader visually. So, that's something you should also convey to your reader in the alt text. If your comic switches color palettes for the flashbacks as well, you can indicate that, or like a dream sequence. So, something you could say is the rosy colors are gone in this panel. They've been replaced by dull, muted colors. We're seeing a flashback. So this way you're telling your reader we are witnessing a flashback, but you're not necessarily going super into detail about every single color that's being used. And you can describe new characters in more detail when you're introduced to them, and then only do so again later if it becomes necessary or relevant to the story in some way. So, like if you have like a character, like think of The Simpsons, they're always pretty much wearing the same outfit, right? But if you see them come in and bring a costume, then that's going to become relevant to the plot. So you would want to see that described. Another good time to do that is if you haven't seen that character in a long time, readers may need a little bit of a refresher too. I'm glad you like that, Lulo. So, another thing to include as well is your dialogue. So, something like panel 1, Jenny rolls her eyes at Katie and says, get a load of these two lovebirds. Yikes, am I right? And think about the tone of that. Versus Jenny rolls her eyes at Katie as they watch Rodrigo and Antoinette. It's kind of similar, but it's definitely different. There are significant details being shared in that dialogue that is important to the moment. So it's important to share that as well in your alt text. Including body language and facial expressions that are relevant to the scene are important as well, but it's not necessarily important or helpful to describe like every neutral face. So like if you have a complicated, complex story, a panel, I should say, uh, that shows like a crowd, you don't need to describe what every person in that crowd is looking like. You can just say maybe the crowd surges in anticipation or the crowd yawns, they look bored. Something like that will help to convey the mood of what's happening with that without having to go into over detail. And you don't want to spoil anything. So uh, you want to make sure that you're sharing any relevant information, but not like going ahead in the story. And I struggle with how to describe this except with through an example. So we have Derek looks up from the ground. A bright blue circle appears on his forehead where the crow's beak tapped him. So this conveys the important information in that scene. But if we change that and we write, Derek looks up from the ground, a bright blue circle appears on his forehead where the crow's beak tapped him. Little did he know he would die in 6 hours. You're kind of spoiling it for your reader. They're not going to get to appreciate that moment as it unfolds compared to a visual reader who is able to see it and not get that information just yet. So let's use some examples. I've used my own work because I feel weird about using other people's work. And I know my work best. So because I'm losing my voice a little bit, I'm only going to read the first page out loud. But in the slides, you'll be able to see all 4 pages of the mini comic here. So this one says The Tiny Friend Comic, page 1. The color palette is bright and colorful. The main character is a tiny, fluffy, old purple fairy whose body looks like a ball of fluff with chubby arms and legs, wrinkles on her face, and pink cheeks. She has a puffy braid that floats behind her, and she floats around in the air. Panel 1. The fairy peeks out from behind a tree, noticing a dandelion ready to bloom in the distance. Panel 2. She flies over to the bud, a speech bubble with a heart coming from her. The bud is green with yellow tips and white fluff at the top. She looks happy to see it. Panel 3. She then notices how many buds there are without a single flower. She hesitates, and sweat drops appear on her head. Panel 4. She uses her magic to make a dandelion bloom, straining as she does so. Panel 5. She floats from bud to bud, using her magic to flower multiple buds, growing more and more tired from the effort as she does so. The sun in the background slowly sets. So that gives you a total of 983 characters. And the reason I point that out is because a lot of social media platforms will limit you to 1,000 characters. So whereas I would need to be a little more descriptive sometimes, this is also something that factored into how I decided to write my alt text so that I could make it accessible on social media as well. And as I mentioned, we've got page 2 here, page 3, and page 4. And you can see we have 796 characters, 722 characters, and 894 characters. And just to briefly mention what's happening here, there's a description of how the color palette changes to indicate the change from day to night. There are mentions about the settings of each panel as well as the interactions between the ladybug and the fireflies, etc. So I definitely would encourage you to go and read that later when you get some time after this presentation. And here are some tips that I have for y'all. I don't even know how many years it's been since I've been doing image descriptions and alt text, but I think at least a decade. So here are some tips that I have for you as somebody who has been doing it for a while. The first thing I would encourage you to do is to make it a part of your creation process. It can help a lot to consider your alt text as a crucial part of the creation process rather than just something like a bonus thing that you add on at the end. And I don't consider my work finished until I've completed the alt text and image descriptions. And it's only at that point that I share my work. Because otherwise, I know myself, if it's not done when I post it, it's not going to get done. I'm not going to remember to go back and add it later. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice too much. And I would also suggest that you do it as you go. So if you're doing like a longer comic, even if it's only like a 20-page comic, I would suggest once you complete a page, maybe consider taking a moment to create the alt text for that page, the transcript. Um, I would say if any of you crochet or knit, if you have to weave in those ends of your yarn at the end, and if that's painful for you, that's kind of what it's going to be like if you do alt text at the end too. For some people, it works and they prefer to do it that way as well. But I think a lot of folks tend to get a little overwhelmed when they see that they have 20 whole pages or 100 pages or more to do of alt text. So it can be helpful to consider doing it one at a time. I would also encourage you to put on reminders. So things like Blue Sky, they offer settings that you can turn on that remind you to add alt text before you post. You can also, if you use anything like a checklist in your process where you write pencils, inks, letters, colors, then you could also add alt text to that checklist as well. Um, And as I mentioned, it's helpful to keep it under 1,000 characters per image. I would suggest this even if you don't think that you're going to post it to social media. Um, if you post it to like your blog or to your newsletter, things like that, or even if you share it with an event or with NIF, I would still encourage you to keep it under 1,000 characters per image. Because if you are sharing it with other people, they're probably going to want to share it too. So if you make your alt text available to somebody else and they decide to promote you on social media for free, this can be a helpful way to ensure that your creations remain accessible to people. And also, you never know when an opportunity is going to come along and you need to provide some images for somebody else to share about your work on social media. Like if you participate in an online convention and they're like, hey, could you give us some images to promo you on during the fest? Then it can be helpful to have that ready to go and not necessarily have to stress about it. And I would also mention that some sites like Shopify will have a more intense restriction. Like they have, I think, a 512 character limitation. So it may be helpful at sometimes to have different versions, but most of the time, keeping it under 1,000 characters per image is going to help you. And I can't stress to you how helpful it has been for me to kind of consolidate all of my alt text into one central location. Um, I used to create alt text in like a different Google Doc for each year, and that made my life worse. And I don't know why I did that to myself. I also used to create alt text and just like I couldn't find the old document, so I would stash it on a new document in a different place, and then it would drive me up the wall trying to find it again. So putting it in something like a spreadsheet is super helpful. And I actually picked up this trick by doing the newsletter through NIF, sorry, through the co-op. Um, and I created a Google form where I can just submit the alt text and the image for myself. So they're both located in the same document in the spreadsheet. And then I can just Control F to try to find the keywords that I used. So that's been really helpful. And another thing that I've been using lately is Milanote. I think I mentioned this in another tip in a minute, though, so I'll save that. Use searchable documents. Like I mentioned, using Control F, Command F is super helpful. Giving yourself breadcrumbs through keywords is really helpful too. Like I mentioned, a submission form has been really great for me. Yeah, so here's the Milanote thing. I'm not affiliated with them or anything. I just really like using Milanote. And I will store my newsletter issues in there so that I can go back and reference them. And one thing that you can do is if you tap on a note, on an image in Milanote, you can start adding the alt text by just typing. And that's been super helpful for me. But the most important thing, as I've mentioned before, is to ask for help when you need it. It is difficult for some people. It's not always easy. It's just important to do, and it's a really great way to be kind to others who need it. Um, and if you have to do something on a short time period and you're feeling overwhelmed, just go ahead and reach out as soon as you need help. It's totally okay to do store-bought if you can't do your homemade. I think that was like Ina Garten or something like that. um, yeah, so let's try one together. Let's practice. We're going to do another round and we're going to have 3 minutes this time. And I'm going to ask you to type up alt text for this for this comic. Oh, I write illustration. So keep these in mind. What's happening in this comic? What information is relevant to the action of the story? Which characters do you need to describe in more detail? What's the overall tone of this comic? And what and how much information is needed to be able to understand the comic without looking at it and not overwhelming the reader? And I would love to see you share it in the chat again when you're done. And I will go ahead and set my timer for 3 minutes, starting now. All right, that was 3 minutes. If you're feeling up for sharing, I'd love to see what you put in the chat. No pressure. Um, and it's okay if it's not finished yet either. I know there's a lot happening in this, and there are a lot of small panels that may be difficult to see. All right, we have one that says, a comic page in grayscale, the lively, whimsical look. Frame 1, a young person awakens to her clock reading 5:31 a.m. Frame 2, we see a hand ironing clothing. Frame 3, she is running towards school holding her grown-up's hand, but the wind blows her cap off. Frame 4, a different pair, a girl and her grown-up with black hair arrive in a shop called Blooms and Lace. Frame 5, breakfast is being prepared on a stove. Frames 6 and 7, we see hands sewing, conveying work throughout the day. Finally, at a lower right, we see the young person being tucked into bed by her grown-up, who then continues working late into the night at the sewing table. Wonderful. We have another one that says comic page in grays. 1, a disabled person wakes up early while another in bed still sleeps. 2, they start ironing. 3, outside, they're in a rush to go, holding the hand of a school child with a lunchbox. They're both losing hats in the wind. 4, they are now at Blooms and Lace Flower Shop at the front desk. Oop. A bundle of flowers in their arms. They greet a pair of customers, also an adult and child. 5 and 6, now at home again cooking. Mom is called out from out of frame. 6, they're sewing. They're still 7, they're still sewing while they eat a simple meal. 8, they tuck a child in bed. And 9, before going back to sewing again, tired. This person says, "Gosh, this was so difficult when it felt like the smallest panels weren't the least important in any way." That was also wonderful. Yeah. So as you can see, um, this both of these did a great job of explaining what's happening, that there's a little bit of a busyness happening going on, that there's a parent and a child, that they're going through kind of the daily activities together while sewing still prominently shows up throughout the work. So let's go ahead and see what I wrote for this comic. So what I wrote, I did this for a presentation I did about sewing for cartoonists in August last year, actually. Wow, a year between events. So I was talking about how to convey characters who do sewing in comics. So what I wrote for this in a rush was a black and white comic with several panels showing a busy parent going about their day and squeezing little moments of sewing in throughout the day as they take their child to school, work at their job as a florist, cook dinner, and put their child to bed. And I only used 257 characters. Now, does this still convey the overall intent of the comic? Yes, it does. Am I personally super satisfied with how this came out? Not really, no. So I did go back and change it to add more details and to do a panel breakdown. Um, this was one of those days where I was in a rush and I just needed to get something so that it would be at least accessible to a degree. This is also an example of something that you could potentially use for something like on Shopify, where they have that 512 character limit. So the overall point I was trying to make about this comic was how this person is short on time, but they're squeezing in these little moments of sewing throughout. And I also think this is a really great example of how describing your own work can make it clearer to others what is happening. Because if you give your piece to somebody else to kind of do an alt text description, they may not always know that the details that are as important to pick up on, or there may be some confusion too. And this is not to make anybody feel bad. I think you did a great job describing what was happening without knowing necessarily who these characters are. But for me, this was about the parent doing this throughout the day, but it looked to somebody else like it was the child waking up, which totally makes sense, right? So, like, it changes the perspective of the comic. And that's why I would encourage you to kind of try to do alt text for your own work as much as you can, because you yourself know what is actually happening and what is at heart most important for it to be described. So something that I changed it to later is oh, sorry. This is the alternative way that I could have written it. A black and white comic with several panels showing a busy parent going through about their day and squeezing little moments of sewing in throughout the day as they take their child to school, work at their job as a florist, cook dinner, and put their child to bed. Sewing seems to fill their life as much as everything else, and there are signs of it everywhere. A quilt on the bed in the panel where they're waking up, a sewing machine at the kitchen table, hand sewing while eating sandwich at lunch, and late night sewing, hand sewing by lamplight after putting their child to bed. So, for characters who sew and for connecting people who read comics because they also like to sew, this would be the details that I would consider important to convey to them. And this is 566 characters, and I feel like this offers a richer reading experience for the reader, even though it isn't still my favorite, which is breaking it down by panel. And this is how I would do that. A black and white comic with several panels squeezed into a square page with very little gutter space, giving the sense of little time and space. Panel 1. A fat white person with short hair wakes up at 5:31 a.m. They yawn awake while another person remains asleep under a quilt with star blocks on it. Panel 2. Steam rises up as the person irons fabric near a kitchen table cluttered with a sewing machine, sewing tools, and a bowl of fruit. Panel 3. Outdoors in daylight. The person runs with a small child wearing a backpack and carrying a lunchbox. They both look startled as the wind blows off the kid's hat. Panel 4. The person greets customers entering a florist shop saying welcome over their shoulder while holding a big bundle of flowers. Panel 5, a tiny snapshot of the person hand sewing next to a sandwich with a bite taken out of it as if on lunch. Panel 6, the person cooks food in the kitchen while their kid calls, Mom. Panel 7, the person squeezes in more hand sewing at the dinner table. Panel 8, the person kisses their child's forehead goodnight as the child lies in bed ready to sleep. Panel 9, the person continues hand sewing by lamplight. Their hair is pulled up now as if getting ready for bed. So I feel like personally this offers the most comprehensive look at what is happening in the comic compared to the other two ways that I wrote it, because it allows the person who's reading the alt text to experience the story as it happens instead of just kind of hearing a summary of what's going on. However, as you'll know by looking at the examples that everybody has here, these all still explain what happened in the comic. So there isn't necessarily like a wrong way to describe what's happening in the comic, other than maybe saying a comic. That may not be helpful at all. But all of these still convey something, and it's really a matter of what your situation is, how much time and energy you have to dedicate to that alt text, what your limitations are character-wise as well, what importance this image shares in the context of the situation, things like that. So a lot of things to think about, but also this one is over 1,000 characters long, which is over the limit for most social media platforms. So this is something that I would use in a transcript, but I would probably go through and see if there's any way I could pare it down even further if I were going to share it on social media. There isn't a limit on the alt text for my newsletter, which I like. So this is something that I would keep at this length for my newsletter. So as you can see, all of these descriptions tell us what's happening in the comic. They just do it to different degrees. And let's compare the information that we get in those examples to other less informative ways of writing it. So other ways that you could technically still be correct in describing this comic is a black and white comic about sewing, a square comic, a person sews in lots of ways, or page 1 of a comic. These aren't technically wrong per se, but they really don't tell you what's happening in the comic. It kind of reminds me of that table example that we did, where it says a table about the pros and cons of owning a ferret. It doesn't really do justice to the comic itself, and it really doesn't help the reader to understand what's actually happening on the page. So writing alt text, like we've talked about, doesn't have to be this super detailed, really long and painful, drawn out thing. It depends on what your image is about, what you're trying to convey when sharing the image, and the other factors too. It's up to you to describe it in the way that you think is most likely to be helpful to the person reading your alt text. And remember that almost everything is better than nothing at all. So we have some resources here. These are all clickable links, so you can check them out in the slide. I did pretty much the majority of this presentation based on my own experience, but I did go through and double check from this person, which their website is called Veronica with 4eyes.com, which is a play on the fact that they wear glasses and are blind, and also that they have 4-letter I's in their website name. So this is really great to take a look through. And I did make sure that I was still giving you correct information because I don't use a screen reader myself. However, I do rely on accessibility tools like captions and transcripts for myself. And alt text occasionally when my internet shits out. So definitely take a look on there. There's a really like a wealth of information on that page that I would recommend you try and see more about. And you can definitely share your questions in the chat with me now. We'll go over that together now. And you can find me online at jbeoin.com. That's jbeoin.com for anybody who needs that spelled. And I've also got a newsletter you can subscribe to. I have an email if you'd like to talk to me. I love talking about accessibility with people. So if you want to talk to me in Discord, that's great too. If you prefer to email me, that's also fine. I'm also on Blue Sky too. And after this recording, I will also talk with you about the things that you need to know for NIF in particular. I'm not going to keep that as part of the recording because that's going to be for the public, whereas only co-op members can submit to NIF. So let's hear your questions. That's the end of the presentation.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Jessi, for that presentation.
My pleasure.
I just wanted to grab a question that had come up during the just during the stream. Uh,
Mhm.
how do screen readers handle colons and semicolons?
That's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that one. Um, that's something I would have to look up specifically. I think things like particular punctuations, I'm never quite sure how that is conveyed. So, like if you used an exclamation point versus a period, I'm also not really sure how that would work. That's something where I would probably solicit the opinion of somebody who does use a screen reader. I know that we have a few blind cartoonists in the co-op, so we could put out like a question in the members chat or something like that to say, hey, does anybody who uses a screen reader have a moment to kind of help me understand this? Things like that, I think. I hope that helped. I know that wasn't like actually answering the question, but that's how I would go about solving it. I see Adrian's mic going on and off.
Well, I was gonna throw in another item, but I want to
Yeah,
get
go
make
for
sure I
it.
open the floor to anybody who would like to either through chat or now's the time that you can activate your mics if you want to just get to a
Yeah,
question verbally.
absolutely. Please feel free to come on. I think I saw another question earlier too about listing who is speaking and whether or not there's a best format for that. And I that's also a really great question that I don't know. I think I haven't really done a whole lot of speaking comics yet myself. So I would probably suggest that you need to probably tag who is speaking each time unless it's extremely clear through the voice of whoever's speaking, like if they have a particular accent, um, or if they say things a very specific way that would immediately and very clearly identify who that character is without a tag. But if not, I would probably make sure to say so and so. Jane says this, Jack says this, Jane says, and so on. Like it's not super great, but I don't personally know of a better way to do that. And that's another thing I think asking a screen reader user would probably be helpful for. I think I saw another question says, um, oh, I would split comic images slash posts if I felt I needed to more alt text over 1,000 characters. Is that a decision with tips on when to do that, how, or when not to? And I think that's a great question. I think it kind of depends on the situation and what your goals are for that. For example, if it is an infographic that gives a lot of text in there, I would absolutely break that up and continue the alt text in the thread underneath. Um, because that's like the heart of that infographic is conveying information, and that's not something that you can really convey with a feeling. uh, versus if you have like that example where I had just 200 or so characters over the limit, and it was describing this one page comic with there aren't really any follow-ups on that. I might still continue it into the next part of the comment in the thread, but more likely, I'm probably just for my own sake, because it's a little difficult for me to keep track of extra comments at times. Um, I would probably condense it a little bit further to make sure that it stays in just that one image, especially if it's something that gets a lot of interactions. People may not always be able to find it depending on which platform you're on. Like, I know Twitter is pretty shit right now, and uh, they don't always keep the follow-up thread from the original poster with the original image. So that's something I might say it's probably better to just kind of shorten it a little bit more. But if it's something like an infographic where it's very information heavy, I would definitely split that up. I hope that helped to answer that question.
There is a site specific question that I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer, but uh, I've been doing alt text in its designated spot on Comic Fury, but I have no idea where it
Mhm.
goes. Maybe I need to put it in the slot where it says mouse over text.
Oh, this is actually something I kind of forgot to include in here. Um, so what a lot of people don't always know is that if you want to find out if an image has alt text, you can click on that on a desktop to find that. So give me a moment. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen if I can remember where the button is. Okay, so I'm gonna find something on my own website because I don't I don't know where else others definitely have it. And I'm going to show you how you can find that information. And I haven't actually done Comic Fury before, but I think that this will likely be similar. Okay, so I have it ready now. Give me just a second. I'm a little slow at this. Okay, are y'all able to see my screen? Hopefully.
That's a yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so we're on my website, and this is the same comic that I showed y'all earlier. So if you right click on this, if you scroll down to where it says Inspect Accessibility Properties and click on that, it'll pop up this scary looking thing. And if you go over here to where it says Properties, Name, and then it shows you this is the alt text. And it gets cut off here. It didn't always do that for me, but it does now. But if you triple click it with your left mouse button and then copy it, like Control C, Command C, and then open up a new document, it'll show you. Let me switch now. It'll show you the whole text. So this is what it'll end up looking like once you copy and paste it somewhere else. And I've used this a lot for uh, things like if I'm sharing somebody else's work, I prefer to see if there's a way that they've written it themselves, especially if it's like somebody who is creating a comic about a character whose identity I don't share. I want to make sure I'm being sensitive to that and making sure I'm not misrepresenting the character or any lived experience with it. So I'll go and right click and just kind of see if I can find that real quick. And that's probably where you might find it on Comic Fury, but I can't say for sure. I'd have to take a look. Yeah, and that was a great question. Thank you for asking. Did we have any other questions too? Hope I got them.
Actually, I'll throw in one, give people some time if they are still thinking over. You mentioned capitalizing, like in the case of
Mm.
Blue Sky, capital B, capital S, Blue Sky. And that's different because this is something Lulo was asking about the camel case, like where that's where you lowercase first letter of the first word and then capitalize every first letter of the subsequent words. Those are different, right?
That is a great question. I actually don't know camel case. Let me see. Sorry, I have an audio processing thing, so it's a little difficult for me to picture it. So let me take a quick look
I
here at
just
the
typed it
search
into the
result.
chat. If uh,
Ah,
any,
thank you.
yeah,
Oh, I see. So like just the first letter of the first word. I don't think that that would make a huge difference. I think it is safe to do that. I can't say for sure since I don't use screen readers, but I believe the emphasis from what I did in my own research was that when two words are squished together, there needs to be a break with that capital letter to indicate that it's transitioning to a second word. Because if you didn't have that, then I believe the screen reader just kind of makes some weird sounds with its mouth and it doesn't quite understand that this is a different word. So I think that that should most likely be fine. I think I saw another question earlier about color palette. Was that somewhere? Someone says Wikipedia says format indicates the words starting with either case, then the rest start with capitals. That sounds about right, I think.
believe that is all the questions we have so far. If I'm missing anything, please don't hesitate to copy paste it into the chat
Yeah.
now. Um, so Jessi, we are going to be before we formally end the Q&A section. I know we're going to be ending the recording and transitioning into the other section. Is this
Mhm.
the time when you'd like me to share the kind of a post event activity materials?
Oh, sure, if you'd like, we can go ahead and stop the recording now too, I think.
Okay. All right
Thanks for
then.
watching, everyone.
Yes, yeah. So thank you so much, Jesse, for walking us through the alt text experience.
Mm.
It frankly taught me a lot that I didn't know, and I was actually during the presentation trying to transcribe like some of my own pages, and like, oh, this is harder than I
Nice.
thought. So thank you, and thank you
My
everybody
pleasure.
for attending. All right, I
Yes,
am
and
ending the
thank you for
recording.
modding, Adrian.
Oh, of course, and I am ending the recording now.